podcast is provided for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as legal, business, investment, or tax advice. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own opinions and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of RCM Alternatives, their affiliates, or companies featured. Due to industry regulations, participants on this podcast are instructed not to make specific trade recommendations nor reference past or potential profits, and listeners are reminded that managed futures, commodity trading, and other alternative investments are complex and carry a risk of substantial losses. As such, they are not suitable for all investors.
Welcome to the Hedged Edge by RCM Ag Services, where we're getting out of the field and onto the mic to bring you weekly market updates, commentary from commodity experts, and monthly interviews with the biggest names in agribusiness. Welcome everyone to the next edition of the Hedged Edge. I am your host, Jeff Eisenberg, and today got the pleasure of inviting and including a world-renowned expert in the meat industry, Simon Quilty. Simon, as I mentioned, is an independent meat and livestock analyst. His research is distributed across all corners of the world, from cattle to lamb to kangaroo and lean hogs to broiler chicken. Simon has had his finger on the pulse of the international protein markets for over the last 3 decades. Simon, welcome. Looking forward to today.
Thanks, Jeff. Nice to be here.
Yeah, good. Well, I think everyone can hear right from the beginning, Simon's got a bit of an accent, Australian accent.
Yeah.
It's what time is it in Australia?
It's just 10 a.m. in the morning, and dare I say, the kangaroos are feeding out, looking out my window here. So it's all happening now.
Happening now. Well, you mentioned kangaroo, and I just cannot think of Australia without thinking of kangaroos. And for those of you who have not seen it, or if you haven't seen it, Simon, there's a video that's gone completely viral on the internet for like the last 6 or 7 years. Of a gentleman who actually boxes a kangaroo. Have you seen the video?
I haven't, but I've seen similar videos, and dare I say, it kind of symbolizes the Australian spirit, I guess, of really somewhat animalistic in what we do know, the fact that we're fighters, I think. So
okay, all right, fighters. Yeah, Australian rules football and everything else.
That's it.
Well, the video, we'll put it in the show notes for anyone who hasn't seen it. It's worth 3 minutes of your time, hands down. So all right, let's get into a bit. Your background, Simon. You've got an interesting background. You've lived all over the world. You've had a chance to visit places that some people only read about. Tell us a little bit. How did you end up where you are today?
Yeah, so my background is commodity trading, but I actually started in as a lobbyist for the Victorian Farmers Federation, which is a political lobby group, and I looked after livestock producers. And from there, I went into meat trading at Louis Dreyfus. And in those days, Louis Dreyfus was the powerhouse. And these were the early 90s, and pretty well was the single largest buyer of beef out of Australia. And I did all the originations for Louis Dreyfus. And then I went on to work with Conagra, who was then Australia's largest meat processor in the late 90s. Then went into my own trading business for a while, and pretty well covered global markets for 10 years or so, and then transitioned across into risk management. So the likes of FC Stone, I worked with for several years, and then went into it on my own and teamed up with a gentleman by the name of Kevin Bost.
Got it.
And Kevin and I have worked closely on doing swaps, derivatives. And in the last year, I've also hung my shingle with Global Agri Trends with Brett Stewart and Richard Fritz. And each week we put together, summaries and updates and analysis of global markets and we do a podcast every Monday morning. So I also trade physical meat at the moment out of Australia.
This is
India.
where it gets interesting. Trading physical meat. You had your own firm, and you're trading physical meat out of Australia. This is some serious business. All right, continue.
So yes, I broker on behalf of a number of importers in America.
Okay.
And I buy Indian pet food or offals that are cooked. That's been going on for several years. And I do trimmings and a lot of cuts out of New Zealand and Australia. And we also focus on the high-end Wagyu of all things as well.
We talked about that earlier. My Wagyu story was cooking Wagyu on hot rocks at Japanese in Chicago. I tell you, that was the way to do it.
Well, my life exists in the present and forward markets, and every day I'm either looking at swaps in pork and beef, all in North America,
right,
and also trading the physical market as well. So it's an existence that's always looking forward.
And you mentioned time we talked before that you also are sourcing kangaroo as a part of for a pet food company. Is that true?
That's correct. Yeah,
wow.
That's out of Northern Australia.
Wow.
So yes, and part of that deal is bones, and so you don't rely too heavily on the forequarter bones. It's the hindquarter bones that matter. They're the big long legs. All right. So yeah, we don't trade many forequarter bones, just hindquarter bones.
Well, don't tell too many women about those hindquarters and their bones. That's not going to get you very far. Oh man. All right, so this is interesting. And one other tidbit of your background that I just can't help but mention is I got some inside baseball from Kevin Bost. Actually, tells me that you happened to be in Tiananmen Square in 1989 when all hell broke loose. I mean, I haven't heard this story. What was going on?
June the 4th. Yeah, I had spent a month traveling with my girlfriend at the time. China, and it was
her name was China.
No,
okay,
her name was
all right,
Claire.
just checking. All right.
But no, we got used to running into you might say protest marches all over China. We knew history was kind of unfolding in front of us, but we were in Xi'an, Chengdu, Guilin, you name it, 100,000 people were marching in the streets in every city. And we kind of, after a while, it became almost a nuisance because we couldn't get to the terracotta warriors, or we couldn't get to point A or B.
Right.
But on June the 4th, we just happened to land we were in Beijing. It was in the square the day that about 3 or 4 hours before the tanks rolled in.
Wow.
And it was pretty traumatic. So mercy flights out of the country, you name it. We were in the thick of it. It took us 7 more days to get out of the country.
Wow.
But there's a story there to be had over a beer, I think, Jeff.
I think so. I look forward to cheersing a Foster's or whatever choice of beer. Maybe you think Budweiser's the way to go. I don't know, but yeah.
Well, put it this way, when we talk of China, I truly understand what the makeup of the country is.
Yeah. And I think that's really important as we transition to kind of talking about markets and your role in the grand scheme of things, is that you come at this from both a buyer and a seller's perspective. You've got the international component, the export business, and in the end of the day, what I really hope to talk with you about here today is obviously markets, where we are, but how people can leverage the research and the expertise of someone like yourself and translate that back into margins and revenue protection for their business, whether they're an exporter themselves, a packer, a producer. It's truly a threading of the needle, to use a term that you and I know very well, to figure out how to apply research into actionable items. And I'd love to get your kind of initial thoughts there, and then we can kind of jump into the markets.
You're 100% right, Jeff. And I think that's one of the most exciting and interesting challenges that both Brett Stewart and Richard Fritz, but also with Kevin as well, Kevin Boss, that we every day are challenging our thoughts going forward. And I'll bring up a very good example where, we are at Global Agri Trends really focused at the moment on how much of the rebuild has gone on in China and where are they really at, because we've seen extraordinary exports of corn into that market.
Correct.
And yet, if that rebuild is very, very immature, if that rebuild has hardly began, then it says a lot about the potential upside of corn from here. And let's touch on that a little later. But next week, we're putting out a series of webinars at Global Agri Trends, and we're talking to the best in the industry on giving our views on where this is heading.
I think that's phenomenal. I can't wait to listen and follow it. So yeah, hopefully a lot of our listeners are also, I'll start to tune in, and at the end here, share with us how we can access some of that material. Great. So, today in the markets, interesting, obviously a risk off day, interesting day to be talking. It's been straight up. Things have been pretty rosy from the bottom of the COVID collapse. And, it's really want to kind of speak to the importance of how the export market is treating, well, I guess let's put it this way, how the domestic U.S. markets are treating these daily and regular exports of both grains and then the potential for pork and beef to start to hit the wires. Give us your thoughts. What are people thinking about right now?
Well, we know that China is desperate for pork and that there is a serious protein deficiency.
Right.
Initially, when we were looking at this, we thought there were probably around 23 million tons in terms of deficit. And we know that we've had an extraordinary year of exports out of Europe, out of South America, and to a certain extent, obviously out of North America.
Right.
But that buying interest has waned in recent times. And the expectation is we keep looking at those forward sales every week, Jeff, looking for that uptick out of the US into China, because we know that we've got Chinese New Year just around the corner, and they've got to start buying here very soon. So the question is, is Santa coming this year to China, or is the global or the economic situation in China that bad that their buying will be somewhat subdued? We could touch on just briefly here.
Sure.
My belief is that we've got what I call a two-speed economy going on in China.
Okay.
So
it's a massive country. There might be 10 speeds. I mean, they might need a mountain bike over there.
Well, you've got an interesting study by the China Beige Book, who are actually a US-based firm in New York, but have had this for 10 years, been monitoring every quarter 3,300 businesses across China.
Okay.
They're of the opinion in their last quarterly survey, which was done just in September, that they've been in recession now since February, and that they put down that it is very localized, the improvement in the economy. In actual fact, it's occurring only in three areas. One is in the Beijing, Tianjin area. Next is Shanghai. And then down the bottom is Guangdong, and in that southern area, all coastal, with the belief that they are growing and returning back to a normal situation quickly. But the inner provinces of China are suffering, Jeff. They're going backwards. So when you look at sales revenue, those coastal regions were up 41% in the last quarter. The inner provinces were down 10% year on year. So you've got a 50% difference in terms of inner provinces versus those coastal regions. And 37% of people reside on the coast. So
Well,
it's
there's
very
also internally there was the massive floods this year, and
that's
the
exactly right.
Yeah.
So let's just add that to the picture as well.
Right. Destruction of demand and actually supply there, right? The amount of grain and soybean fields that were destroyed. Yeah.
Well, 38% of the hog population resides in the Yangtze Basin. So that was
big number.
And what's interesting is that African swine fever was spread through the floodwaters. So
really?
if the animals weren't lost due to flooding themselves and drowned, they were picking up African swine fever due to the flooded through the waters themselves. So, there's lots of permeables and permutations going on there. But the important message is that there are parts of China suffering, the majority, and there are parts doing really well. And there's your two-speed economy. And if you can manage to focus on the higher speed, then you're going to do okay. But I think that a lot of unfortunate, the frozen section of the market has been kind of difficult. And that's where I think, unfortunately, a lot of pork has ended up going into, is trying to feed the masses that are really struggling. I think that the high end, which is your grain-fed beef, is servicing those really successful regions on the coast. And as a result, we've seen an extraordinary explosion, you might say, in US beef exports in the last 3 to 4 weeks.
That's interesting. And interesting also that you brought up the frozen side of things. I guess two thoughts, and I did listen to your podcast on Monday, and a note that I pulled that was extremely interesting to me was that there's reports that there's a belief across China that COVID-19 can be transmitted via the frozen import market. And be real interested to hear from you, your thoughts as to how that's going to impact U.S. export demand and what's really happening on the inside of China. Like you're saying, they're eating down their current frozen, but what about the need to replace that? And where's it going to come from if they think that people are going to get sick?
Once again, it's just another complex problem within China. And it's almost as if different parts of the Chinese government have different views and are doing their own thing almost. But what a lot of people are not aware of is that globally, 54 meat processing plants around the world are banned from exporting into China because of COVID-19. So what's happened is that COVID at those various plants have been found and reported in the local media, and China has stepped in and said, we don't want your meat.
Wow.
Now, right now, it's only 2 plants in America that are banned. But in Brazil, it's 7 plants that are banned. In Australia, we have 7 plants banned, but only 2 due to COVID, and the other 5 are due to labeling issues and a chemical residue issue.
Wow.
There's a lot of politics going on as well, Jeff. The point being, though, is that there is genuine politics as well, because the high infection countries like North America are not really being focused on by China.
Right.
And I think we're going to see the trend move from this offshore kind of focus that China's had for the last 4 months to an onshore within China focus. So by that, I mean that the level of testing within China is increasing by the day. And they're testing at all different levels. Upon arrival in ports,
right,
they're testing at wholesale markets, they're testing 100% testing at manufacturing plants, and then in cold stores, they're testing.
Wow.
And then it comes down to individual cities. And those cities have taken it upon themselves to start testing themselves in their own way.
So do you think that this leads to a scenario where China really truly tries to aggressively rebuild their livestock herd, tries to eliminate all of the impurities that are possible, whether it's COVID-19 or ASF, and then in the end also as a result has to abandon certain feed items in China, like you mentioned in your podcast, swill and garbage, and ultimately ends up importing more grain, and which could rock the world grain markets.
Yeah. Well, so yes to all of the above.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
To answer your question is that there is going to be some fundamental changes within China. Why don't we, as a suggestion, if I could share some thoughts here on my screen, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think you have some data to share. Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. So as we've said, I'm part of the Global Agri-Trends group, and people can get in touch via our website. But we, through Global Agri-Trends, are looking forward at potentially all the trends that are occurring globally. And then I have also a local consulting business out of Australia, but I do a lot of work internationally for a number of companies on individual projects and what they're dealing with.
And what we'll do is we'll pull up some slides here, and in this slide, if you can click over into the show notes or follow us on YouTube, you can go and check out some of the charts. Otherwise, we'll do a good job describing what we're looking at. Go ahead.
So one of the important things that the CME initiative deals with is the fact that, last March, April, when we saw the effects of COVID-19, and we had that situation where slaughter levels fell 35 to 40% within North America, that saw prices of beef and pork in instances almost double, and in some instances went further. So the net effect was falling livestock prices, higher meat prices, and then suddenly we end up with a situation where the basis risk between processed meat and hogs was just simply too great. And the role of the hedge became almost irrelevant, and or it became actually a problem. And it cost many companies a lot of money. So I think there's no doubt that the vulnerability of the lean hog index was shown in terms of its price relationship to processed meat.
And this is great because, as you've alluded to, the CME is coming out with a cutout contract to help reduce some of the risk associated with the basis. And then there's also the access to the swap markets, which we're working on, that we can help support. Really, at the end of the day, the margins for a lot of the packers and producers, this is what we're trying to mitigate, these risks.
That's correct.
This is great. Yeah.
So Jeff, it's not only just the basis risk between meat types. So if we're talking hams, pork trim 72s or 42s, and how they relate to the market, but also for a lot of pork producers, they may be selling to their local nearby barn basis, and so we can remove that basis risk, whether it's cutout or it's the hogs themselves. But if they're wanting to just price against their local sale barn, that's very feasible as well. So basis risk is not just seen when it comes to the meat itself and the various cuts and the relationship between cutout and the hog index, but we can localize that down to your local area and remove that basis risk between national pricing and your local area.
Yeah, and that's where the consulting side comes in, and I can appreciate that. That's great. Good deal. So what do we have here? This is the specs on the contract.
That's correct, and they're fairly straightforward, and we won't dwell on this for too long. Yeah. But the important thing is they're 40,000 pound lots, which is very consistent with other contracts. We've also got here a situation of that it's the 10th day of the business day of the trading month, slightly different to the hog situation. We've got the fact that it's financially settled. So
that's a big difference right there. The financially settled component, it almost treats it as if it is a swap.
That's right. So as we've said, we're all about looking at forward markets. And one of the key areas of concern of late, as we've said, is what's really going on in China. So I'm going to draw up a couple of charts here just to dwell on. We've got here the China average live hog price. So in the last few weeks, there's been speculation in the press that China is now back to within 10% of their hog population or herd size. That would mean that we saw a hog herd size of about 425 million in China before ASF came, African swine fever.
So I have to recall, they said they lost half their herd and now they're within 10% of the high within 9 months?
Well, there was always uncertainty about how much they claimed they had lost.
Okay.
But the belief was that it was close to half of their herd that had been lost. So this would imply if that 375 million head or thereabouts are now back in the system. What flies in the face of that is the fact that they're referring to October of 2000 or September of 2019 as being, I guess, the point at which it was at its lowest. And the figures there were given was 37%, which would be around about 264 million. My point here is that if you look at the pricing here of September last year, we're sitting there at around about 28 renminbi. And if you looked at what September did this year, it's sitting at 36 renminbi.
Right.
If they rebuild, why would hogs be so much higher this year in September versus last year when the absolute low was, Jeff?
Right.
So
what's the answer? Tell
the
us.
answer is that they have not rebuilt within 10%.
Got it.
I'm guessing luckily they would not be rebuilt within 30%, to be honest. So we go to the time
from the time you take the hog from a piglet to a sow, I mean, come on, you can't rebuild that fast.
That's right. So let's look then at the second factor here is sow prices. And if we go back once again to the period in which the rebuild was supposed to happen, instead we've got record sow prices today.
So the rebuild, just for people that are not watching, the rebuild price was around 60. The average, this is renminbi. The average historically prior to that looks to be just in the 30 to 38 range.
Correct.
ASF hits, it pops up near 60, and now today in the 75.
Correct.
Range. Okay.
So it begs the question, once again, if the sows had increased in such extraordinary numbers over the last year, why are we at record prices for sows?
Okay.
So, and then the last key is piglet prices. So once again, we go right back to September, October last year, and the market's sitting at about 70. And we bring the clock forward to today, and we're just below 100.
Right.
Piglet prices are very, very high at the moment. I would argue that potentially the real low in the herd happened around about May this year, and that we've had a mild rebuild over the last 6 months or less, 5 months, but we're well short of the mark. And why all this is so relevant is that it's because we've had such extraordinary corn volumes going into China. And if we're not that far down the rebuild, and yet corn is already at these extraordinary volumes, what's it going to mean in the future when we seriously get into the rebuild?
Right.
When that
right.
30%.
Well, and you can't forget what you mentioned earlier. We discussed is that they're also rebuilding. They're needing to import the corn in larger quantities because of the fact that they can no longer feed the pigs. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, garbage. And oftentimes people raise pigs in order to feed them their waste, but that's how ASF spread. So you're about to show here a chart where you've got potentially huge demand for imported corn and soybean meal, along with the rising tide of the Chinese hog herd. This to me is the most important data piece of today's research. This is great. Go ahead.
Yeah. So you can see that we've had the correction here in terms of China's hogs since 2018, and yet corn did not miss a beat, nor did soy mills, I should say, for that reason.
This is the import. This is the amount of corn and soybeans imported to China.
Correct.
Is that what I'm looking at? Yeah.
That's correct.
Right.
So, if the hog numbers had fallen that much, even if conservatively 37% was right, then why didn't corn fall during that period? And the answer, as you rightly pointed out, is swill. In actual fact, they just simply banned swill throughout the entire country. And it wasn't just backyard feeding operations that were using swill, which was once 30% of the entire production, but it was large commercial operations used swill as well. And they were banned. The entire country, as you rightly point out, realized that African swine fever was being spread through swill. So all we've seen is displacement of swill out of the system and corn and soy meal stepping in. So in actual fact, once that starts to move higher, that hog number, the pressure on these two feed ingredients is going to be enormous. And that's the purpose of our discussions next week, is to try and to quantify how high these numbers will go.
That's interesting. And I think, any farmers that are listening, obviously they could hear what we're saying and think, okay, we're heading back to 2012 prices in corn. Not so fast, right? You have to keep in mind that there's supply and demand factors in every market, and price inputs go up. Well, then people are going to shift to other protein sources potentially to offset some of these costs. So, I think in my view, this is very supportive of corn, very supportive of soybeans having rallied as much as they have to these highs. I think if again, any farmers that are paying attention here, continue to sell your forward sell your crops at profitable levels. Do not bank everything on China being a mass importer to get you to $7. But I think Simon, I think there's at least a reason to be optimistic that we could see some much higher prices, at least in the grains.
Correct. And I guess the real concern will be that, the feed crush, the farmer is, the hog producer here is going to get squeezed.
Right.
In terms of the high input costs. We'd like to think that the value of the pork is going to go higher, but if we're right on this corn situation, it's going to be a challenge, and ultimately could well lead to liquidation. And that is the real underlying concern here is, how much damage is going to be done on the back of China's enormous corn needs. It could drive international prices to some pretty high numbers here. And we're thinking sooner than later. So once again, it's all about risk management. It's all about trying to ensure that you are not getting, I guess, too exposed to some of these factors. And we know that as a hog producer, they can manage those input costs in terms of risk, and they can manage those output costs now with the cutout and with hog futures. So there's two sides to this. And I think as we move forward here, Jeff, I think that's our role, is to try and, show them the better ways in which to try and manage this risk.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that your point there about the purchasing of inputs, I mean, some of our largest producers and packers have been doing this for years and managing that input cost. So just the same as the farmer looking to sell at higher prices, on the other side, use the tools, the resources that are available as a part of the financial markets to mitigate or at least know what your input costs are. And that's where Simon, his expertise comes in, as well as the members of our team. So great. No, this has been excellent. Excellent review of where we are in markets, where we are in the grains. Our favorite ways to end all of these discussions, which happens to be talking about favorites. And these things are the personality of who you are and who our guests are. And the first one I ask, what's your favorite place that you've lived in all of the world?
Well, I've got to say, Colorado,
Yes.
Denver, and dare I say, Fort Collins, where my wife and I lived for just over a year and fell in love with skiing. And in those days, dare I say, the local breweries of Fort Collins.
That's great, man. After my own heart, I love Colorado skiing. It's passion of mine as well. I didn't know that about you. We'll have to get together for a run.
For a fat tire.
Yes, sir. Yes, the first time I had fat tire was in Colorado, and then they did a funny thing with that, is that they opened up the distribution lines for fat tire across the Colorado borders and showed up in Illinois. And the way that they marketed it was unreal. They actually sent, you probably have seen the signs. It's a unicycle with a red unicycle and a bright sign, neon sign. They sent those signs to bars in Chicago, and they only sold it in 22-ounce containers. There was no 12-ounce bottles. There was no kegs, and they sold out for months in every bar. Anyway, fat tire fun fact for you. Let's see, favorite other than your own podcasts and website. What's your favorite podcasts and or agriculture book?
It's a good question. I guess I'm so busy making my own. I get rarely any time to look at what else others are doing. So I've got to say, I am, part of the reason why I joined the Global AgriTrends team, and not to pump up Brett Stewart's tires too much here, but when I joined the stage with Brett, I was pretty impressed by his performance and what he does. I think he's one of the best in the game. Yeah. So if I was to say, who would be my favorite person in the ag space on presentations and podcasts and who to listen to, I'm going to say Brett Stewart. And I know that sounds like I'm speaking from a vested interest, but I truly mean it.
Oh, you did just, you joined on about a year ago, so you joined for a reason. That makes good sense. Well, hopefully the hedged edge finds its way onto your list here.
Thank you. I hope so too.
What is your favorite Aussie pie filling?
Oh, well, beef, of course.
Wagyu, maybe?
Wagyu,
Yeah.
lamb. We have a lot of lamb in Australia, as you probably know. So,
Okay.
yeah. And in my area here, they're kind of famous for the pies. So we get spoilt by having a choice of pies in this area.
Perfect. That sounds good. I'll have to, again, get down to see you. And then the last, which maybe you already answered, is my personal favorite is what is your favorite extreme sport that you either are involved in or wish you could do in another life?
Well, I play tennis every Monday night, and
Okay.
that is not an extreme sport. And the pace at which I'm playing these days is kind of, you'd almost think we're in slow motion. I think we've all, enjoyed the thought of jumping out of a plane, and the older you get, the more nervous you become because, dare I say, responsibilities. So in a completely irresponsible world, I'd be jumping out of a plane. But unfortunately, my wife and children would put a stop to that today, I think.
That's good. So have you ever done it, or this would be just you would hope to?
I would hope,
Bucket
yeah,
list. Okay.
on my
When I
bucket
was 18 years old, actually about 15 friends and myself, we decided to throw all caution to the wind, and we did it. We went together. We ended up doing the tandem jumps. I think we were 10 or 12,000 feet, and I gotta tell you, it's a rush of a lifetime. So
Yeah, that may have to wait until at least I've stopped working, retired. So should the parachute fail, it doesn't really matter then.
sounds good. Well,
Yeah,
Simon, really appreciate you taking the time this morning in Australia, this evening here in the States, and really look forward to do this again next time. And you've put up a couple times where to access you. You want to just go ahead and give the listeners a recap of how to access Global Agri
sure.
Trends and yourself?
Yeah. So my availability is on simon.quilty at bigpond.com. And Global Agri Trends is pretty easy to find on the web. So, reach out to us, please do.
Sounds great. We'll do it. Thanks again, Simon. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you. You too,
Thanks.
Jeff.
All right.
You've been listening to The Hedged Edge. Links from this episode will be in the episode description of this channel. Follow us on Twitter at ag_RCM, like our Facebook page under RCM Ag Services, and visit our website, read our blog, and subscribe to our newsletter at rcmagservices.com. If you like our show, introduce a friend and show them how to subscribe. And be sure to leave comments. We'd love to hear them.